A good wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm, all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax, and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night, and provides food for her household, and tasks for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She girds her loins with strength, and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor, and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes herself coverings. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates, when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers girdles to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. So what can we learn from this that the world doesn't teach us? That we shouldn't pursue women simply because they're beautiful, or simply because they please us. The beauty will pass away. You'll get bored of somebody who's beautiful quite quickly, and eventually you will see through the charm, if the charm is there to simply deceive. So these are two things that most people in the world, I believe, can learn from, because so often we are drawn by our own passions, by our own desires to look upon something beautiful which we shouldn't look at. And also to pursue somebody that pleases us, and somebody who has no real depth of character. A great priest once said, actually, I heard this in a talk, he said, if you find somebody who's nice, beware of the knife that's in your back. Because these sorts of people that please the senses, that please our appetites, that please our emotions, but it doesn't go any deeper than that, or they're overly concerned with this, they're people of the world, and they should not be associated with. This goes for men and for women. You should also, and this is a little bit harder to grasp perhaps, pursue a woman who simply obeys everything that you say. Because if she simply does everything that you say, then that means that she's not following God, she's following you. And since you're not God, and since you do make mistakes, then that means that the woman is also going to make mistakes. She has to be able to obey you, but she has to follow God first, for in God is truth, and if she's pursuing you, she abides in falsehood. And we all wish to acquire that truth, which we are made for. And so therefore don't pick a woman who simply obeys you. But if you must seek something, beyond the diligence mentioned in the last passage, beyond the desire to help the poor, the charity in the last passage, and beyond, quite frankly, the implicit Christianity in the passage, all her children are clothed in scarlet, you ought to pursue humility, because a humble woman is one who will submit to the truth. The greatest virtue that a person can have, and is actually called a super virtue or something like this by St. Gregory the Great, this is humility, which is not this kind of squeamish little man syndrome, but is rather the submission to the truth and the holding of the truth to the bitter end. People possess this to lesser and greater extents, but when somebody, particularly a woman, is found with this humility, then it is well worth going for her. It also probably goes without saying as well that you should pursue women with the other virtues as well. Chastity, the ability to control her drink or to not drink at all, the latter is preferable. you should be going for a woman who isn't ugly because of her poor habits. So, there are many women out there who would otherwise be attractive, but because they're really fat, they look really ugly. This is a sign of a disease. You shouldn't be going for this. But also, one thing I would say as well, that I think that many people tend to think is important but really isn't, is, aside from perhaps on faith, it isn't necessary to share a hobby with a woman that you're going to marry. You just have to have a mutual sense of goodwill. You can be entirely different, but if you have the mutual sense of goodwill, and you can work together on things, even if you don't have the same hobbies, then this will still work out just fine, because ultimately what matters in the relationship isn't passing pleasures in certain hobbies, which, they do change over time, but what matters is that underlying loving bond, which will endure regardless of the changes in the physical and passing things of the world. So, pick the sort of woman that would look after you even if you had cancer. And you can get a pretty good indication of this, I think, based on how charitable she is with other people. You can get this indication based on how much she loves you. And you can get this indication through the other virtues. Because one of the things that Father Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange says in his great work, 3 Ages of the Interior Life, is that the state of grace has a way of stabilizing all of the other virtues. So if you're presumably Catholic, if you're watching this, you might be Protestant or even atheist. If you find a woman with the state of grace, then it is likely that her virtues are going to be more ordered than somebody who isn't. So you'll see a woman who's much more well-rounded with the state of grace. And so from these you can tell if she's got one virtue, she'll probably have another. If you know with moral certitude that she has a state of grace. Finally, I'd pick somebody that you can pray with as well. Now, this is seemingly quite easy, but a lot of people have different spiritual styles. So a more charismatic person, somebody in the charismatic renewal, might be interested in praise and worship, so they might blare Hillsong before they begin to worship. Likewise, a trad might blare a Gregorian chants or something like this. Or, somebody of the Eastern tradition is more likely to have an emphasis on the Jesus prayer as opposed to the rosary. So, this is an extremely minor thing in comparison to the other things that I've said, but I think if there's a certain degree of overlap where you can pray together, or an ability to not be too irritated with the other person's preferences or requirements for prayer. Of course, if you're a trad and you meet a charismatic lady and she just won't pray without praise and worship songs, that might be a problem. But if you can set those aside, then that's fine. So this was just a few of my thoughts. They're by no means exhaustive. I hope that you guys have found this useful. In order to keep this going and to keep another project going that I'm going to be releasing hopefully fairly soon, please donate to my Patreon. It'll be in the description. Thank you, and goodbye.